Over here,
Oh, okay, perfect.
for you.
Are you going to tell me when to start?
No, as soon as she starts, you just started.
Okay, so what I'm going to be using for my debate is embryonic genetic modification. So my claim is going to be that embryonic genetic modification is socially dangerous and is a socially dangerous medical advancement. So if anyone doesn't know who if everyone doesn't know what embryonic genetic modification is, that's when they go and then they will change DNA sequences, change things like that so that they can modify the child so that when the child is born, they'll either resemble certain traits or they won't have the genotype for certain diseases or anything like that. So it's considered to be a radical medical procedure, and it's opening the doors for a lot of other debatable medical advances as well. So by permitting embryonic modification, it can lead to things like eye color changes, hair texture modification, gender preselection, and higher intelligence levels, as well as this one thing called a 3-person baby. So the big thing that's a problem with this is that it kind of fades the boundary lines for what we can consider to be correct use of medical technology and what we can consider to be used as overly excessive and other things like that. But the United Kingdom is now the first country to introduce laws that allow the creation of babies of 3 people. So 3 people babies is 2 women's eggs, 1 man's sperm. A fetus's physical image can be predetermined and modified without question or moral objection. Partial birth abortion rates may spike dramatically due to the dehumanization of a fetus. So by casually changing things about an unborn child without any kind of hesitation or anything like that is going to make it so much easier for people to do things in the future once this becomes a new norm. DNA is very sensitive, and although you may prevent a genetic disease, you may cause another abnormality as well. So although you may stop a child from being born with a shorter leg on their left leg or something like that, they could end up having a more serious disease as well. And in the New York Times, they said simply because being able to do something doesn't mean we should actually do it. Just because we have the technology to do these advanced procedures, and since they can bring positive outcomes, they also can bring along with it many negative, detrimental new experiments that can harm the human race long term as well. It can also lead to this thing called participant evolution. So participant evolution is the process of deliberately redesigning the human body and brain using technological means rather than through natural processes of mutation and natural selection, while the goal is removing biological limitations. So this is where the ideas of the designer baby or things like the superhuman come into mind. So we can build people who can have higher IQs, higher intelligence levels. This opens the doors for having what people consider the ideal baby or the ideal child. And that can be very detrimental to a child's psyche growing up if they find out that they were designed or modified and things like that. So it can be very superficially motivated as well. A child is not a toy, so to be trying to play dress up with their genes is it's very controversial, and it's something that a lot of doctors do not feel necessarily comfortable with at the time, even though it is up for debate throughout. And also, embryonic modification is an extremely selfish act on the parent's part. People want to modify another person's body because of their own personal views of beauty. So, because me and my husband feel like, oh, babies with blue eyes is cute, so I'm going to make my child have blue eyes. That's a very selfish act because now you're risking the child's life and the child's development because of your definition of what attractive is and what unattractive is. And also, parents are changing their child's predestined image because it doesn't correlate with what they believe their children should develop into. Putting these predestinies into little children who don't even know themselves yet isn't fair on their part, and they're controlling how the child is developing and permanent issues that the child is going to have to deal with on a day-to-day basis before the child even gets to have a say-so. So I feel as though embryonic modification is very selfish, and the child is the one living in the body, not their parents. So why does the parent get to have the decision of altering them for the rest of their lives? So this is a very controversial subject, and it's a very it's up for heated debate right now within the government, within the FDA, and within other medical journals and medical advance teams as well. So embryonic genetic modification is socially dangerous medical advancement. Thank you.
All right, Rebecca, I thought that you did a pretty good job kind of defining what the issue is at the beginning with a few examples and explanations. And then you do have a very clear statement of what the proposition is, so that part is good. And then you run into a couple of problems. There's not really a layout of what the substructure is going to be, so it's awfully hard to tell where we're headed in the body of the speech. Like I said, I did think you defined a general enough category or a specific enough category that we can tell what the subject matter is. That's okay, but I don't know what the secondary claims are. It sounds like one of them is that we're eliminating boundary lines. Another one is that we're creating these designer baby sorts of things. And another one is that there's maybe potential risk involved with this. And then there are several value claims. I just think there needs to be a much clearer structure in the presentation. You kind of explain a lot of your reservations, but all of your explanations are dependent on our acceptance of some of the provisos that you say are true, but I didn't hear any evidence on. For instance, you say that there's always likely to be a negative consequence. So what... For instance, designer babies with a particular eye color, what would be the negative consequence to the child? What genetic harm is going to occur? There is probably some quote about this that explains what the risks are involved. But at the moment, I don't know that any of this is more risky than taking or not taking vitamins when you're pregnant, or eating a particular kind of food, or exercising, or staying off your feet, or any of those sorts of things. What is the degree of risk that we're talking about? There's no information on that. There are only two things that you really cite as evidence. One is the New York Times, and the New York Times quote is very vague. It doesn't even sound like it is being quoted directly. It sounds like you're paraphrasing what they've said there. And then I get a reference to a piece of factual data that says that the UK now recognizes three-person babies, although I don't get a citation of that, and I still don't know what a three-person baby is. I mean, I know that there are two eggs in a single sperm. Well, how does that work? That sounds to me like you would be creating twins. Is there some way that they put those things together in order to get features of all three people involved? You need to give me an explanation. And if they passed a law on this, then there must be some example of it. Why aren't you referring to that example? I see that as being quite problematic. There's not any statistical information about what the level of risk is. I don't hear any geneticists being quoted on this. The only factual data that I got referred to was, like I said, that UK law, and we've got a lot of hypothetical examples that we're having to deal with, and I'm not sure that the hypotheticals are all that convincing. I do think you do a nice job speaking to the audience. You kind of, like I said, explain some of the subjects, but there's not really much proof that any of the risks that you talk about are likely or probable. And maybe you don't like the idea of a designer baby, but the whole bunch of these arguments are value-based. You say it's based on selfishness. Well, I think everybody who has a child is basing it on selfishness. The very fact that you choose, people say that all the time. What makes you think you're entitled to bring a child into this world? Well, I guess that's a selfish decision on my part. Well, why is that a less selfish decision than I wanted to bring a child in with blue eyes or with, extra large ears for hearing well, or long tongue to replace Gene Simmons in Kiss. Why are those things worse than having a child in the first place? And like I said, that's a value-based issue more than anything else. All right, thank you. Appreciate your